Police say it was the suspect herself who dialed 911 to report a medical emergency. When they arrived, they say Catherine Kieu uttered the words, "He deserved it." Authorities say they found the woman's husband inside this Garden Grove condominium. His hands and feet had been tied to a bed. They say he was bleeding from his groin area.
This is the story of Catherine Kieu Becker. She lived in suburban California, married with children, appearing to have the kind of stable life many people aspire to. Friends and neighbors saw a woman managing the daily chaos of family life, seemingly balanced, routine, and calm. Nothing about her exterior hinted at the emotional storm brewing behind closed doors, but the reality of Catherine's life was far from normal. By 2011, Catherine's marriage to Glenn Becker was in serious decline. Divorce proceedings were underway, tensions were high. Daily interactions that once may have been routine now carried resentment and unspoken anger. Arguments, though sometimes subtle, created an undercurrent of fear, uncertainty, and escalating hostility.
She met this guy at a gym, the victim, and after they married, he subjected her to sexual and verbal abuse.
According to them.
Right, and filed for divorce while they continued to live together in their Garden Grove home. But other people are saying that it was over a house guest that maybe overstayed their welcome. So
no, she's crazy. No. And I don't believe her, I'm be honest.
Court documents would later show that Catherine had been struggling with intense feelings of loss of control. To her, the impending divorce wasn't merely an end of a relationship. It felt like a personal humiliation, a threat to her identity, her independence, and her position within her own family. Friends noted that she appeared increasingly anxious and emotionally volatile during this period, and her reactions to ordinary disagreements were intensifying. Glenn Becker, meanwhile, was attempting to move forward with his life. He had filed for divorce, sought legal independence, and had begun seeing another woman. This detail, though ordinary in the context of divorce, would become a key point in the tragedy that followed. The night of April 11, 2011 began like many others. Glenn returned home and went to bed. There were no signs of an immediate confrontation, no loud arguments, no neighbors alerted to trouble. Everything appeared quiet, normal, and predictable. Yet predictability would be the last comfort that night. Hours later, Glenn woke in excruciating pain. What had unfolded in that bedroom was deliberate, methodical, and horrifying.
48-year-old Catherine Kieu Becker had a plan that was calculated. They believe she served her husband dinner laced with drugs at their Garden Grove condo last night. When her husband passed out, she tied him to their bed, allegedly cut off his penis with a 10-inch kitchen knife, placed his body part in the garbage disposal, and turned it on. Then she called 911.
She was extremely calm.
Investigators would later confirm that this was not a sudden act of rage or a momentary loss of control. It was intentional. Catherine had attacked Glenn while he slept, using a blunt instrument to incapacitate him. What followed was calculated. She then used a knife to commit a mutilation so extreme that it stunned even seasoned investigators.
Officers found her husband bleeding from the groin and took his body part from the disposal, turning it over to paramedics.
It was put into the garbage disposal, and we believe that it was turned on by her prior to us getting there.
So pretty badly ground up?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
The act was completed with steps taken to conceal what had been done, a reflection not of chaos but conscious planning.
She was basically on top of him with the knife, getting ready to cut his penis off, so he was awake when that happened.
When emergency services arrived, Glenn was still alive, though severely injured. He was rushed to the hospital, fighting to survive. Catherine's actions had crossed a line no one could ignore, no matter how private the family life had seemed from the outside. And while no lives were lost that night, the emotional and psychological devastation would leave permanent scars, not just for Glenn, but for their children, their families, and the wider community.
To me, it's a shock, She doesn't look like the type of person that would do something like that.
What makes this case particularly shocking is the simplicity of the motive. Anger, jealousy, and fear of losing control in a marriage. No complex criminal mastermind, no long-term scheming. Just human emotions taken to an extreme, producing consequences that few could imagine and no one could easily forget.
The victim, who described himself today as feeling anxious and traumatized, spoke before the court and described how at the time of the crime, he and Kieu were splitting up.
In this story, the calm facade of ordinary life hides a truth we rarely acknowledge. Sometimes the most extreme acts can emerge from the most familiar settings. Following the attack, law enforcement moved quickly. Catherine Kieu Becker did not flee. She remained in the house as investigators began their work. Her demeanor during questioning was surprisingly calm, which only deepened the sense of disbelief for the officers on the scene. Police meticulously documented the scene. Evidence indicated the attack occurred while Glenn slept. The tools and methods used were deliberate, suggesting careful thought rather than spontaneous violence. Investigators found remnants of the mutilation and evidence that steps had been taken to hide the severity of the act. These details confirmed what many feared. The act had been intentional and planned. Court records revealed that Catherine had been dealing with escalating stress and emotional instability in the months leading up to the incident.
The public defender says that he told the jury that traumatic childhood that she had in a war-torn Vietnam caused mental illness. It bars her from a mayhem or torture conviction.
In these types of cases, it's not unusual to vilify the victim, but when it comes down to it, it's a case of domestic violence. This is a serious case. I know a lot of people may joke about it, but it's a very serious case involving consequences both for the victim and the defendant. It's a life case, right now we are still investigating the case. We're looking at... Will not be part of this case? Motive is not a part of any case, actually, in any criminal case. But it's hard to believe what could possibly motivate a woman to do this to somebody she's supposed to
Divorce proceedings were contentious, and Catherine reportedly felt humiliated and powerless. She perceived her husband's new relationship and attempts to move forward as direct attacks on her autonomy and authority within the family. Witness statements painted a portrait of a woman caught between anger and fear, whose internalized frustration...
Well, they seem like they get along well, and usually there's like no fights or anything, and it's really quiet.
Experts later testified that while emotional volatility was evident...
This was a horrible event. In effect, the victim is serving, or is going to be serving a life sentence because of what the defendant did to him. She, in turn, deserves her life sentence.
Investigators and prosecutors highlighted a series of actions indicating awareness of wrongdoing. From the tools used to the steps taken to conceal the attack, Catherine's actions demonstrated deliberate intent. Police body cam footage, courtroom sketches, and evidentiary photos, often shown in media coverage, emphasized the chilling calculation behind what many would assume to be a private domestic dispute. The media coverage that followed focused on the extremity of the act. Analysts, psychologists, and legal experts debated how ordinary domestic conflicts could escalate to such a level of violence. Footage from the courtroom, combined with official statements, helped the public grasp the severity while maintaining the focus on the human dimension, a marriage that had dissolved in betrayal, resentment, and unaddressed emotion. What becomes clear in reviewing these events is that Catherine's motive was disturbingly simple. No financial gain, no elaborate plot, no outside influence. Just raw human emotion amplified by perceived loss of control, humiliation, and the fear of abandonment. Anger transformed into action, and ordinary tools of daily life became instruments of horror. For viewers, the case illustrates a crucial point about domestic conflict. The simplest motives, when combined with unchecked emotion, can produce outcomes far more extreme than anyone anticipates. Every object in the home, every moment of inattention, every emotional argument, when left unaddressed, can contribute to a catastrophic tipping point. Catherine Kieu Becker's actions were the culmination of this tipping point. A marriage that began with promise ended in a single night of violence that shocked the community, the media, and eventually a national audience. The human, emotional, and psychological consequences were immediate and profound.
Her actions were as calculated, they were as cold, they were as callous as any murder in the first degree. Probation is denied.
The judge rejected a defense plea for probation and dismissed the argument that Catherine Kieu should be given leniency because she is a model citizen who suffers from mental illness.
The case proceeded to trial, and the courtroom became a stage where the details of that night were laid bare. Prosecutors emphasized Catherine's deliberate actions, her planning, and her attempt to conceal the attack. Defense experts painted a complex picture of emotional instability and perceived betrayal, but the evidence of intentionality was overwhelming. Over days of testimony, the jury was presented with not only the forensic details, but also a narrative of human emotion pushed to extremes. They heard from investigators, psychologists, friends, and family, each offering insights into how a woman who seemed ordinary could commit such an extraordinary act. The verdict was clear. Catherine Kieu Becker was convicted of aggravated mayhem and other related charges. The court imposed a sentence of life in prison with the possibility of parole.
Surgeons at UCI Medical Center in Orange performed emergency surgery, but could not reattach the man's penis, which had been retrieved from the disposal. Kieu remains in custody in lieu of $1 million bail. If convicted, she faces a potential life term in prison with the possibility of parole.
Reflecting both the severity of the actions and the recognition that Glenn Becker survived, though with permanent trauma. For Glenn, the consequences of that night were profound. The physical injuries healed slowly, but the psychological impact was lifelong.
You tie him to a chair, cut off his penis, and then have him watch you put it in the garbage disposal. I mean, that just screams premeditated.
The ripple effects extended beyond the immediate family, reaching friends, neighbors, and the broader community, all left grappling with disbelief and horror. The Kieu Becker case remains a chilling reminder that domestic spaces, often seen as safe, can harbor extreme risk when emotion overrides reason. The crime itself was not motivated by greed, revenge, or criminal enterprise, but by deeply human feelings: anger, jealousy, and the desperate need to assert control. As viewers, the takeaway is stark. The most shocking crimes are not always the result of elaborate schemes. Sometimes they emerge from ordinary lives, familiar settings, and relationships that unravel in ways no one could foresee.
They seem pretty happy though. I mean, like nothing like really, I don't see them fighting.
The Kieu Becker case demonstrates that extreme acts can arise from the simplest motives, leaving consequences that echo far beyond the night they occur. And for those watching, it is a haunting reflection. Even the most familiar faces and spaces can conceal stories of violence, betrayal, and irreversible decisions. Thank you for watching. If you want to explore more real cases and untold criminal stories, consider to subscribe this channel.